Now on BBC News, comprehensive coverage of the day's important national and international news stories. Newsnight.
With the government braced for a new wave of protest in the coming days at hotels housing asylum seekers, does the policy response match the scale of public anger? And more than 50 Democratic lawmakers have fled the state of Texas in a row over election boundaries. As the Republican governor orders their arrest, I'll ask one of them if she plans to turn herself in. Good evening, this is Matt Chorley with your Tuesday Newsnight, live as always across the UK and around the world from Broadcasting House. Thanks for joining us. Now tonight, the potency of protest here in the UK as police and politicians wonder how this week will unfold, and in America, Democrat politicians downing tools to protest their Republican rivals. Also tonight, with measles vaccination rates in some parts of the UK now at half the level required to protect us all, we'll speak to a woman who recently lost her daughter to the disease. So on your panel tonight, political editor of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorpe, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome to you both, good to see you. And political correspondent Joe Pike is here. So Joe, what's the latest on these protests?
Well, from social media posts, Matt, it seems at least 14 protests are due to take place later this week, various locations around England, although outside hotels used to house asylum seekers. Now, this is definitely on the radar of the Home Office. In fact, Cooper's team are telling me tonight she's been kept up to date and is regularly in touch with the National Police Chiefs Council, because obviously a protest or a public order situation, it's up to police chiefs to deal with them, not politicians. But there remains this real nervousness, some would even argue a sense of dread, in Number 10 and in the Home Office in different parts of Whitehall about the possibility we could see something this year similar to what we saw last year, all of that disorder, where you'll remember 1,800 people were arrested, 1,100 were charged. And there's nothing, of course, approaching that yet. But if you put together the potency of the issue of immigration, a lot of different posts on social media, plus the weather, plus people being out of school, you can see why some, Matt, in government are worried and are nervous.
And you mentioned the numbers last year. What effect or impact could major protests this time have on the prison system?
Well, there has been some speculation in the last few hours that work is underway within the prison system to create extra space, not just for these protests around immigration and asylum, but also a separate protest taking place on Saturday, this March for Palestine, a major march in the capital, some saying that puts a lot of pressure on the Met. Certainly, Ministry of Justice sources have told me tonight that it's absolute nonsense to suggest extra work is underway. They've told me no extra space has been made free. We're constantly monitoring numbers and have capacity in the estate should any be required for any reason. But of course, the background to this is major capacity problems in the prison system, and that report from Dame Anne Owers this morning that said that during Rishi Sunak's premiership, the whole system was close to collapse at various points.
Thanks for that, Joe. Stay there because we'll come back to you. Liam, what's the situation in your patch in Liverpool?
So obviously we saw, kind of the start, the genesis of last summer's trouble that spread around the country in Southport, on the streets of Southport after the horrendous killings that we saw at the Taylor Swift party. That moved on to Liverpool. We had serious public disorder in Liverpool. Now, we haven't had a lot of that this time around, but we have got a fairly regular protest now happening outside a hotel in the Wirral that we know is housing asylum seekers. That has at times been very, very tense, and there has been a couple of arrests as well. And I think from what Joe was saying, there'll be concerns, obviously, that we see some of the scenes that we saw last summer in Merseyside, which were extremely damaging. You remember we had a library burnt down, things like that. It was terrible, terrible scenes. And I just think personally that there's a lot of people who need to do more and do less in terms of stoking these tensions. I think we're seeing a lot of mainstream politicians who are just playing into this sort of thing. We know that the far right are organising heavily in many of these areas. We also had that in Knowsley in 2023, and I think media commentators, sort of more mainstream politicians need to be a bit more wary of their language as we see some of these scenes develop.
Anita, I want to ask, because you grew up in Epping, didn't you?
Oh, yes, next door.
And so tell us a bit about, where these hotels pop up and then the impact that has on local communities.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there are so many of these hotels. There's about, I think, 200 across the UK. So there are a lot of constituencies, and most MPs that you speak to will have experienced having a person, an asylum hotel kind of pop up. And I think the first thing to say is that obviously the asylum seekers are not able to work. And so often they don't just stay in the hotel, they kind of congregate in town centres as you'd expect. But that does create somewhat of a different atmosphere for local residents. And I know that, obviously, Liam, you've spoken about some of the more extreme forces that are coming in and are certainly inciting and being very provocative and, in my view, very unhelpful. But a lot of the concern will be coming from ordinary residents who are saying, we don't know who they are, we are concerned because of some of the stories they may have seen or some of the things that were experienced, particularly, for instance, in Epping. And therefore, the fact that there isn't really debate or really consent because the Home Office does have to find these places and it's not done by agreement, there is a lot of dissatisfaction in communities. And in some ways, I am surprised that this issue hasn't reached mainstream political debate, because although the numbers themselves are not especially high, but it's still sort of 30,000 asylum seekers that are housed in these hotels, and people do become aware of it and it becomes sort of visibly different.
And because they're concentrated, they have an impact.
Yeah.
I want to bring in an interview I did a bit earlier on with Matthew Collins, who's a former senior member of the National Front, who's now part of Hope Not Hate, a group which campaigns against far-right extremism. And I asked him about these protests.
This is a dream come true for the extreme far-right. And unfortunately, we're seeing far-right groups and individuals from the far-right we haven't seen for years turn up outside these hotels and fill in that vacuum. And, like you said, there are people that may have legitimate concerns about why there are people living in hotels, but we don't really have people answering those questions. And, it's literally an open door for the extreme far right.
I wanted to ask about your reading of the role then of where we've seen these protests opposing migrant hotels, then counter-protests as well. What impact does that have?
Well, I think nobody wants the situation outside these hotels to turn into a riot. And I know that there are really very decent people who want to show support and solidarity to those people living in asylum, living in basically limbo in these hotels. But we don't want these situations, obviously, to turn into riots, because that plays into the far right's hands. That allows the far right to, again, place all these problems, all the violence at the foot of the refugee and asylum seekers. The government needs to explain why we are in the situation, as was the previous government, in the situation that people are arriving. Why aren't the French doing more to stop it? What are we actually doing? And what are our obligations? And
Anita, Matthew Collins is there saying the far right is seizing this moment and a return of groups that we hadn't seen for some time. How worried do you think we should be about that?
I think that we've always, and there have been moments in our history where we've had problems, and more extreme problems, I would argue, with the far right. And there were moments where, the BNP and the Big Threat embarking, which is not actually too far from this part of the part of London that we're discussing right now when we think about Epping. So I don't feel as though that is especially something that is new. But I think what worries me is the nature of those conversations, in the sense that they are taking place online in large part, with a lot of people spreading mis and disinformation that is readily believed because it's seen on a viral video or on TikTok or on Instagram. And it's further creating a sense of, I think, dislocation in our society, where we have young people getting information, particularly young men, from sources that we cannot challenge and we can't discredit because we don't necessarily know about it. So I think there is a troubling part of this, which is how much some of these ideas are being mainstreamed and how quickly, and we saw this last year, misinformation can spread, which does worry the community and can cause, extreme unrest.
I totally agree. I don't know if you've opened X anytime recently, but it's alarming how this kind of language, that, let's just call out what it is, just extreme racism at times, is just playing out every day on that social media channel. But I'm going to call again on people who are, I would consider, more on the mainstream, and I include some Conservative MPs, some commentators, political commentators. If I have to read another article from commentators saying Britain is about to blow, it's like they want it to happen. And I think that everyone needs to dial the language down. We are dealing with extremism here. We are seeing the far right openly on our streets again, which is, you know, something that they used to be kind of cast more to the fringes of society. So I think that everyone has a responsibility, including mainstream politicians, to dial down the language, stop trying to stir things up, because otherwise we will see what we saw last summer, and we can't have that again.
It's interesting, Joe, there's some new polling on sort of public perceptions of this issue which will raise questions about how politicians respond.
Yeah, Matt, interesting numbers from YouGov on not just public attitudes, but public understanding, really, of immigration. One question in particular I think is interesting. This one, do you think there are more immigrants staying in the UK legally or illegally? And if we look at those first two rows, the 32 and the 15% figures, if we add those two numbers together, i.e. if we add those who think much more and somewhat more immigrants staying in the UK are illegal rather than legal, you get 47%. And therefore, that is suggesting that almost half of Britons think there are more migrants staying in the UK illegally rather than legally. That is not the case. If you look at recent census data, it suggests there are around 10 million people living in the UK who weren't born here. So the foreign-born population in the UK is around 10 million. The numbers of those who are illegal immigrants, illegal migrants, is between maybe 120 and 1,000 and 1.3 million, according to various estimates. A significant figure, of course, Matt, but nothing like the majority. And therefore, I think it suggests that people have a very strong opinions on immigration, but don't necessarily have all of them a strong handle on the reality of
and
the
clearly
numbers.
some of those perceptions are being shaped by the conversation we've been having on social media and newspapers as well. So Anita, you were in government in comms in the last Conservative government. So what would be your advice to the government if you've got a situation where the public have a view which is not matched by the facts, but there's clearly concern, and it's not just far right people who are turning up, it's people with concerns about what's, as you were saying, in their community. What do you do in that situation if you're the government? Do you tell the public they're wrong, or do you try and address an issue that you know is not as serious as they think?
Yeah, I think you do the exact opposite of what they've been doing. So, number one, I think, Liam, you talked about the Conservatives whipping up language. I actually think some of the briefing that's come from government, and I think Lisa Nandy also said, like, it might blow or something, or use that kind of language. I think I've seen quite a lot of it from Labour ministers who I think are trying to say, we take this seriously, but I think are inadvertently saying this is very serious, i.e. this, something bad could happen. And I think that one of the problems the government has gotten themselves into on immigration is saying things, and we talk ad nauseum about the Keir Starmer speech, but saying very, very tough things about immigration being a problem, and then not having any of the solutions to match if he was serious about the scale of that problem. And that is the challenge the government's got itself into when it comes to comms.
Can I just say what a dramatic failure that stat is that Joe has just pointed out there? The vast majority of people polled by YouGov think that there are far more people here illegally than there are legally, and it's nothing like that. It's about 4%.
Yeah,
that's because that's where politicians
but that's the reality of
media. Everyone has failed.
But that's the reality of stats anyway.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. It's good to see you both, Anita and Liam. And we'll be covering this story more on my Five Live programme every weekday afternoon from 2 o'clock if you just can't get enough of me. Now let's head to America, where the US state of Texas is famous around the world for its cowboys, gunfights and the lawlessness of the Wild West. Perhaps it's appropriate then that a modern-day political row over changes to the electoral map has ended with dozens of Democratic lawmakers holed up outside state lines. Republicans want to hold a vote that could determine the balance of power by giving them 5 extra seats in the US House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. That vote can only go ahead with 2/3 of the state body president, which is why the Democrat state representatives left Texas and headed for the hills. Well, now the state's governor, Greg Abbott, has issued orders that they might be arrested on sight and fined $500 a day. So a little earlier, I spoke to one of the fugitive Democrats, Ana Maria Rodriguez Ramos, and I asked her what her plan was and how long the Texas representatives are planning to stay in Illinois.
the idea is that we break a quorum, which means they cannot advance and continue to move any legislation forward if there is not enough people present to pass forward that legislation. So what we know is that Trump called our governor, Governor Abbott, and said, find me 5 more seats. So to answer your question, how long we're going to stay out, we're going to stay out as long as possible, as long as we can continue to keep this fight and encourage others to be aware, be informed, and until Governor Abbott backs down.
You say this is democracy. Isn't democracy to stay in your state, to win the argument, to use the democratic process, not to cross the border and go and hide in a hotel?
Well, no, we're not hiding. People know where we're at, and it is part of the rules that we have in what is still a democracy, that one can break quorum. That is part of the procedural rules that we have in our session. And so the truth is, this is the only way we're protecting democracy right now, by making sure that they don't continue this business. In Texas, the Republicans control the state legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and that's what they want to control nationwide. And we know that there is, under this current president, under this current administration, there are no checks and balances. So if, in fact, we have to break quorum and leave to a blue state to protect our democracy, we're willing to do that. It is a new day. Unfortunately, in America, we're not dealing with the same reasonable rules of the game. That's not what's happening anymore. This man is ordering people getting kidnapped off the streets. This man is forcing an economic policy that is causing so much harm and disaster, not only in our country, but nationwide, worldwide. So we have to use every tool at our disposal to continue to protect our democracy.
But isn't the truth, the reason the Republicans run Texas and the reason that Donald Trump can do what he does is because they keep winning. People keep voting. Americans keep voting for them. There's nothing undemocratic about that.
Well, so let's step back. There is something very democratic about the party in power always stripping away people's voting rights, which is exactly what they do. They intimidate, they steal elections, they redistrict, they gerrymander so that people don't feel like they have a voice, and so they do not go vote.
Give me a sense of the mood in the hotel where 30 of you are right now. You say you're in it for the long haul. What's the mood with your colleagues? Have you got enough clothes? Have you got enough things to talk about? Tell me about what it's like in the hotel, and is everyone holding together?
Well, that's a really good question. The reality is it's difficult for everyone. When we decide to break quorum, when we decide to leave the states, it's not easy for anyone. And so this is where you really know who is with you through thick and thin, right? But the beauty of it is that we all know that this is bigger than all of us. This is bigger than our constituencies. This is bigger than even Texas.
You say you're worried about your constituents. By you not being there in the state, it is the case that some people say you're letting them down. You're not there to vote on important work, the recovery process from the terrible floods that Texas suffered.
The people in my community, my constituents who I was elected to represent, are very supportive of our efforts, and they know what it means, the long-term implications. So the truth is, Governor Abbott and the Republicans, again, control all levels of the government. They could have had all of the assistance that they needed to help these families way before having to stall and to use the flooding relief as an excuse to steal our country.
Just finally, I have to put to you that where you are in Illinois right now, the map there, as a result of the boundaries being redrawn, the map in Illinois has been graded F by the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, which grades exactly what's going on in lots of places. Actually, what we're talking about here, the redrawing of boundaries to political benefit, is exactly what the Democrats have done in Illinois and other places where you're in control. Parties are both as bad as one another.
Well, maybe they foresaw what this Trump and the Republican administration was going to do. But the truth is, in Texas, it's a new day, and our fight has to put everything on the table. So redrawing the maps, if that's what we need to do to give balance, then that's what we need to do.
OK, really appreciate your time this evening. It's good to speak to you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Well, back to the UK now, where doctors are urging parents to get their children vaccinated this summer amid a measles outbreak. The latest figures released by the UK Health Security Agency last week show there have been 674 confirmed cases of measles in England since the start of the year, with 87 of those in July. And so-called measles hotspots in London, the northwest and the east of England. And in some of those areas, vaccination rates are below 50%, with herd immunity typically reached when 94% of the population are vaccinated. In a moment, we'll speak to Professor Helen Bedford. But first, Rebecca Archer joins us from her home in Salford, which is the area with the most cases outside of London. Now, Rebecca's daughter, Renee, died of measles complications in 2023 when she was just 10. And Rebecca, we really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you for that. If you can, just explain to us what happened to Renee.
Renee caught the measles at 5 months old. She was quite poorly, but after the usual 10-14 days, she recovered, and she was fit and healthy. And then 10 years later, when Renee was 10, I had a phone call from school to say that she'd had a seizure. And then she went, that was in July 2023, and then she went on to have further seizures, and they thought it might have been epilepsy, so she got treated for epilepsy. The seizures stopped, but she was admitted to hospital because her motor functions started to deteriorate. And then they done an MRI scan and discovered she had swelling on her brain. And then she was in hospital for around a month and a half. And eventually she couldn't speak or eat. And then she went into ICU, and it wasn't until she was in ICU that they told me that it was actually SSPE, which is a complication from measles 10 years previous, and that it would be fatal. That was around 10 days before she passed away.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. And we should explain that the reason that she was so young when she contracted measles, she was too young to have had the vaccination. That's right, isn't it? Yeah,
she was 5 months old. Yeah. She was 5 months old, and you don't get your measles jab until 12 months old. But in 2013, when Renee contracted the measles, there was a large outbreak.
So in a way, that situation when you've got very young children, you're relying on other people having had the vaccine and hoping that would have protected her.
Yeah, because if there wasn't such an outbreak and there was more children vaccinated at the time, she might not have contracted the measles before she was too young to be vaccinated.
And just tell me, because as I mentioned,
here today.
Salford has got I'm sorry to interrupt you. Salford has got very low rates of vaccination and these higher rates of cases. You know the area well. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people in the area where you live are more maybe sceptical about the vaccines?
I think it's more misinformation and spectacle and theories surrounding like autism and what the injections can cause, which is misinformation. And they're just scaremongered, I think.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. We'll come back to you in a moment. I just want to bring in. Go on. If you've got a message for parents, what would your message to parents be?
Just to it could save the child's life, and it can also save other children's lives if they are vaccinated. It's like I say, Renee might still be with us today if people did vaccinate their children. And there wouldn't be such a large outbreak, which is still ongoing today.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. I want to bring in Helen now. How does it make you feel? You know, you're such an expert in this. You're following this all the time. How does it make you feel hearing Rebecca's story?
Well, obviously, it's tragic. It's completely tragic and completely preventable, unfortunately. And it is about what you were describing, herd immunity, making sure that if you have high enough levels of uptake of vaccine in the population, that will protect people like children under 1, like pregnant women, like children with immune problems who can't be vaccinated.
And I asked Rebecca the same question, but where is this coming from? The vaccine scepticism? Is that the right phrase?
It's a mixture of things. It isn't all about vaccine scepticism by any means. So there've been a couple of really big research studies recently which show that it's complicated, it's complex, but a lot of the under-vaccination we see is among underserved communities who have difficulty
accessing. What do you mean by underserved?
Well, they have difficulty accessing services. So disadvantage goes hand in hand with low vaccine uptake. So it might be around not getting enough information, not having access, not knowing who to ask for information, but also difficulties making appointments, getting to appointments. If you're poor and you have to take time off work and you're not going to be paid to take time off work, that can be a challenge, that can be a barrier to getting your child vaccinated.
And so is the solution then very sort of geographically specific? Is it about a national approach, or is it about something that you can do in these, because in some areas there are hardly any outbreaks and then you've got sort of dozens of cases in a single month?
Well, it's a mixture of national policy, what we need to do at a national level, but also local communities will have different things going on that require a different solution. So it might be that a certain community needs to hear from their trusted community leaders that vaccination is valuable and important for their children. We need to look at what's happening locally. There isn't just one size fits all.
Just finally, Rebecca, I want to come back to you. While we've been talking, we've been seeing some lovely photos of Renee. We really appreciate you coming on and talking about this important issue. But just tell us before we let you go your memories of Renee and how you'd like her to be remembered.
She was just a really intelligent, bubbly girl. She was really caring. She was an amazing big sister to her siblings. She was my right arm and my best friend. She was just really intelligent. She was going places, I say. And I don't know where she got that from, but yeah, she was just an amazing little girl, yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing her story and delivering that message. Rebecca, thanks so much for that. Thank you for joining us. Let me just bring in our panel. Liam, we've talked about this. This is also an issue in your patch in Liverpool, isn't it?
Certainly is, yeah. And tragically, we had the death of a child at Alderhay Hospital from Liverpool earlier this summer. The latest cases, there's a rise in infections both in Liverpool and the Knowsley area, which completely corresponds with what Helen's saying in terms of where deprivation is, there is issues with vaccine uptake. I also think it's really important hearing from Rebecca about the misinformation as well. As journalists, when we put these stories out there about rising infections, we are inundated with conspiracy theories, people accusing us of trying to spread it around because we're part of some agenda to get their kids vaccinated, people bringing up the misinformation from the 1990s about autism, which is so widely discredited, but now seems to be making a bit of a resurgence, and it's all because of social media, so that's a big problem.
And Anita, what about COVID? Because obviously there was a lot of just debate around vaccination at that point in different groups and their willingness to have those. Is there a tale from COVID that's part of this?
Well, I think online certainly, I think we've seen an increase in the number of, you don't know what's in this, what could the implications be of vaccines, and I think that scepticism has carried through. But I would say there's also, I think you're totally right about the pockets of communities, and I think certainly like in the Afro-Caribbean community, there was more vaccine hesitancy, for instance, and it takes very specific interventions to be able to tackle that. And it's frustrating in some ways. Well, first of all, when we see tragic loss of life that is easily preventable about a disease that we almost eradicated. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but we really did get to a point where we had really reasonable and robust immunity. And so it is frustrating to get here. And I think particularly this government talks about wanting a preventative health service. This is the kind of area where you can make a manifest difference by being targeted and focused.
Helen, you're nodding.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, it's a Labour pledge that to give every child the best start in life, which is not only, right from a child right point of view, from an equity point of view, but it makes economic sense that we want the next generation to be able to, work and contribute to society.
Thanks so much for that. Really good to see you all. Thank you for joining us. You can find plenty more Newsnight interviews and analysis via our YouTube channel, so you can watch us non-stop all round the clock. Now, let's take a quick look at a few of the stories on tomorrow's front pages. Quite the mixed bag. On the front of The Sun, Lineker back on the box. ITV swoop for Match of the Day legend, hosting a new ITV game show called The Box. On the front of The Guardian, from above, Gaza is like the aftermath of an apocalypse. On the Mirror, Epstein, the Queen and the Royal Box. And on the Telegraph, Reeves told raise taxes now to fill £50 billion black hole. Katie's back here with you tomorrow. Until then, that's your Newsnight. Good night.
I'm Lucy Hockings in Washington. This is BBC World News America. Internal divisions in Israel, families of hostages and the IDF push back against Prime Minister Netanyahu's reported plans to fully occupy Gaza. After Texas Republicans set out plans to redraw congressional districts in their favor, Democrats say they might retaliate by redistricting to their advantage. At least 4 people are dead. Dozens more are missing after these dramatic flash floods sweep through a village in northern India. Hello, welcome to this extended hour of World News America, where we will bring you live news and analysis from here in the US, the UK, and right around the world. The UN says it's deeply alarmed by reports that Israel plans to expand its military operations throughout the Gaza Strip, saying the move could have catastrophic consequences. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly pushing ahead with these plans, despite opposition from top security officials that includes his army chief of staff. Israeli media say he could seek security cabinet approval later this week. Israel says it already controls 75% of Gaza. You can see it here, the red on the map. Netanyahu's plan would see the IDF move into densely populated areas, raising huge concerns for the Strip's 2 million residents. Families of Israeli hostages also warn that this is a move that could endanger their loved ones. On Tuesday, the UN Security Council met at Israel's request after Hamas released new videos of hostages Eviatar David and Ron Boslavsky. These images show them before their abduction on October the 7th, and here they are, seen in captivity under duress. They are among 50 hostages still held, with only 20 believed to be alive. Mr. David's brother addressed the UN earlier.
My little brother was forced to speak to the world and then actively began to dig his own grave inside a filthy, dark tunnel in Gaza. My mother and I could not even bring ourselves to watch it. We knew that if we did, we would be unable to function. My father and sister, however, felt they had to see him, to hear his voice, to feel him somehow. Now those images haunt them. My father cannot sleep, and my mother has not stopped crying ever since.
In Gaza, aid groups say that despite more food supplies entering the territory, it's not enough to starve off widespread starvation. On Tuesday, the UN Special Rapporteur called on Tuesday for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to be immediately disbanded, saying it was being exploited for covert military and geopolitical agendas. The US rejected the accusations at the UN. Take a listen.
Unfortunately, at a time when pressure on Hamas is more necessary than ever to free the hostages and end the war, some have instead taken steps that embolden Hamas and undermine the negotiators' efforts. We must be clear that unproductive publicity stunts like last week's two-state solution conference and unilateral announcements regarding recognition of a Palestinian state undercut the efforts of mediators and prolong the war. These gifts to Hamas not only imperil the hostages, they also hurt the civilians of Gaza, who continue to suffer what President Trump has recognized as real starvation. Those who have professed concern about the reported risk of famine should join the United States in supporting the GHF's work in securely delivering food to civilians in Gaza. It is essential that our humanitarian response help those civilians without benefiting Hamas. Mr. President, countries, including the members of this council, face a choice: whether to continue with actions that reward and encourage Hamas, or whether to hold the terrorist organization responsible for its actions.
For NGOs like the Red Cross, there is growing anger around the conditions both sides are imposing around the issue of aid. Fabrizio Carboni is the head of regional delegation to the US and Canada at the International Committee of the Red Cross. He joined my colleague Sumi Somaskanda in the studio earlier.
That we should stop conditioning assistance to hostages, assistance to wounded, assistance to kids in Gaza, to other political security conditions. This access should be unimpeded, unrestricted. Today, the hostages in Gaza need an urgent assistance. They need first to be freed, because there is no reason to have hostages. That's the starting point. And two, it's time for the parties to this conflict to be serious and give us access. And the same goes for the civilian population in Gaza.
I do want to ask you, one of your colleagues on the ground was killed just in the last few days. He works for the Palestinian Red Crescent. Israel has said it will look into this. Have they given a response as to what happened?
No, not to my knowledge, but probably the answer will come. But again, I don't see an answer which could justify the number of Palestinian Red Crescent volunteers killed, ICRC killed, humanitarian actors killed. I think it's really time to put an end to this dramatic humanitarian situation.
Let's talk now to Ezzedine Chokri Fisher, who is a distinguished fellow at Dartmouth College and a former Egyptian diplomat in Israel. Good to have you with us, Mr. Fisher. Can we start firstly with this threat, this discussion that Benjamin Netanyahu is having with his security cabinet on reoccupying all of Gaza? If this happened, what would it mean for the people who live there?
Well, it means intensifying the conflict more. It means more horrific images are going to come out of Gaza. It means more victims are going to fall. Only in the last 48 hours, 92 Palestinians have been killed. That means there will be more and more of Palestinians killed. It means hostages' life is also at risk. And it means political turmoil is going to continue and intensify. Sadly, if we do not offer the parties a path to a permanent ceasefire that responds to their main concerns, it is more likely that this is the direction the crisis is going to head to.
You don't just think this could be a negotiating tactic on the part of Mr. Netanyahu? Some are suggesting that.
Well, it could be, but those are not mutually exclusive. And a tactic that involves moving tanks and bombing people and so on is a lot more than a tactic for the people on the ground, for the civilian population, but also for the people who are exposing their lives in this fighting. This is, even if it's thought of as a tactic, it has real life consequences.
We heard from the UN today that they believe it would have catastrophic consequences. We've just been speaking to the Red Cross as well about their real concerns at the moment that this is not going to come to an end anytime soon. Given there are so many statements made every single day that then don't seem to go anywhere, do you think that there is a viable path forward now?
Yes, the only viable path I see has to respond to two main concerns. Israel is not going to stop its operations, let alone withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip, let alone allow reconstruction of Gaza, unless it has rock-solid guarantee that Gaza is not going to be a source of threat for its citizens again. Israel had made it very clear it's not going back to the pre-October 7th situation. So whatever solution we come up with has to fulfill that one condition. At the same time, to achieve this, you have to find a way for Palestinians to exercise self-determination and to live freely and in dignity, and to do this without this becoming a security threat for Israel. So a solution that gives those two conditions has to involve a third-party presence in Gaza, because Hamas is not an acceptable power to remain in Gaza after a withdrawal, and because the PA is too weak to do it and Israel is not interested in cooperating with it. So you need the third party. And if you look around, the only third party that enjoys enough trust among Palestinians and Israelis is Egypt.
Would Egypt be willing to take this on, though? They have many problems of their own, an economy that is struggling. It might also involve taking in many thousands of Palestinians into Egypt.
Egypt is not going to take anybody into Egypt other than Egyptians. And the president made it clear over and over again. Last time he said this morning. So what I'm talking about is Egypt becoming a custodial power. It is not going to replace the Palestinian Authority. It's going to help the Palestinians, both Hamas and the PA, build a Palestinian state, but while taking control of the Gaza Strip itself in agreement with Israel. What I'm talking about is Egypt stepping in order to play that third-party role with agreement from all sides. However, as you said, Egypt has problems of its own, and it really would rather not play this role. It's a big ask, and for Egypt to accept to carry this responsibility, it's going to need help and support of Israel and the Palestinians in the region and the international community. And not only economic support, but political and military and security support, so that this doesn't become a source of tension between Egypt and Israel, or between Egypt and the Palestinian factions.
Mr. Fouchier, very interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We have some incredible pictures to bring you now on devastation caused by floods in India. We're hearing at least 4 people have been killed, dozens are feared trapped in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's when a massive cloudburst triggered heavy flash floods, and it drove a torrent of mud down the mountain into a tourist village that was full of hotels, resorts and restaurants. It happened here in Uttarakhand state. Rescue teams have arrived at Darali, which was the village that has borne the brunt of the floods, as Samira Hussain reports.
A torrent of water and mud gushing down the Himalayan mountainside, ripping through the remote village of Darali. A destructive path, leaving demolished buildings, overturned vehicles in its wake. Rescuers frantically getting to survivors. A normally difficult place to access, made more challenging by the weather.
Rescue operations are underway. Until now, around 20 people have been rescued, of which those who are injured are receiving treatment in the battalion MI ring. Unfortunately, sometime after that, the mudslide and cloudburst also struck the Indian Army camp and portion of our rescue columns.
The carnage, a result of a cloudburst, a localized but intense wave of heavy rainfall, usually generated by a thunderstorm, causing a violent uprush of air that stops raindrops falling. The water accumulates, then falls to the ground in a rush. The result? A crushing sea of water and mud, taking people by surprise, and the scale of which remains unclear. Samira Hussain, BBC News.
Let's just take you live to Japan, to the city of Hiroshima. It is 80 years since a nuclear bomb was dropped on a civilian population for the first time there, followed by a second bomb in the country 3 days later. It is a moment of sober reflection, not only in Japan, but right around the world. And we will be live there shortly. Around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. Welcome back. You're live with BBC News. Let's bring you an update now on the political turmoil in Texas. There's been a standoff between Democrats and Republicans there after the Republican-led legislature based here in the state capital, Austin, redrew the map of congressional boundaries. Now, why does this matter? Because moving these borders shifts the political power and in particular puts 5 key Democrat-held areas into areas which now favour Republicans. This still all needs final approval by the Texas legislature, but it's been heavily criticised, with many taking to the state capitol to protest, especially because this move has been accused of impacting the Black and Hispanic community. Redrawing district lines on racial grounds is illegal across the US. In the meantime, though, some Texan Democrats have tried to kick this into the long grass by leaving the state. This means they're preventing a vote taking place on the matter with the required numbers. The Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, has issued a civil arrest warrant and called for their arrest. Here's one Texas Democrat who isn't happy, Representative Ramon Romero from Fort Worth, speaking earlier.
So right now, there's folks saying that we walked out. And I think everyone behind me will say, we're standing up. And as Texans would say, we're standing tall. There's others that are saying and warning us that they're going to arrest us or make us pay fines. I'll pay that price for America. Yes. And I think everyone behind me would say they would do the same. That would be a very small price to pay for what we would save for these Americans that have fought so hard and against the maps that aim directly at Black and brown voices.
Gene Wu is chairman of the Texas State House Democratic Caucus. He made the move to Illinois to bring the vote to a standstill, and he's been speaking to Sumi.
So, we're here because there are simply no other options, because we've tried every tact to get Republicans to do what they promised that they would do, which is work on the disaster preparation for the Kerrville disaster, and also to help make sure that we prevent future disasters. They've not even had a single hearing. They've not even filed a bill on that when we broke quorum on Monday. In Chicago, we're here in Chicago to try to stop this corruption, to put an end to it, and hopefully to get the public to be aware of this corruption that is happening in their system and how their leaders, the Republicans who have controlled the state for 30 years, completely ignore their pleas, ignore everything that they want, and they keep getting away with it.
Representative Wu, you know that Republicans in the state have said you're running away from your duties in Texas. I know that you and your delegation say that's simply not the case. Do you think your constituents in Texas agree with what you've done?
So, we had a quorum break in 2021, and during that time, probably 85–90% of the messages that came in were pretty negative, were pretty against us. This time, because today is a completely different world. What Donald Trump has done to this country is dreadful, and people recognize that. And now, the messages coming in are 99-1 in support, right? A complete flip. Our country is now different. The world is different. And what we're saying to everyone is, we're buying you time. Democrats in Texas are buying you time to wake up and stand up and get ready to fight.
Well, joining me now is Kyle Tepper, who represents the 84th District in the Texas House of Representatives, is one of the many Republicans in the House. Very good to have you with us here on BBC News. Mr. Wu and his colleagues don't show any sign of returning anytime soon. What do you think should happen to them?
I think, first of all, I wish they would just return voluntarily. I think they'll run out of gas, but we've looked at some recent tweets from the Speaker and from Governor Abbott, and it looks like they're going to take some pretty tough measures to get them back, including the possibility of them losing their offices.
Do you think the federal government should get involved with returning them, possibly even the FBI, which has been suggested by some, tracking them down?
I think it's a possibility. All tools are on the table.
And you support that?
I would support bringing them back peacefully, but if it has to be by law enforcement, that would be an option I would approve of.
What do you say to the Democrats who say that this redistricting is really disadvantageous to Black, brown and Latino communities?
That's all they've got. They pulled the race card in almost every issue down here, so it's not very unusual to us. I think it's important to note here that 55% of Hispanics in Texas voted for Donald Trump for president. And I think I really need to drive that home. 55% of Hispanics in Texas voted for Donald Trump, have become Republicans. 20% of young Black men have apparently voted for Donald Trump, and that number is growing by the day. They're not taking their orders from tradition anymore. They're looking at the issues and the policies, and they're turning Republican.
Can you explain to us why Republicans are doing this now? It should happen every 10 years, and you're doing it in the middle of this 10 years because, of course, many say this is just a political power grab. You're doing this for President Trump.
It's required to happen every 10 years, but we have the option to do it every year if we want to. And also, Texas was sort of robbed of our 2 congressional seats, and this is admitted by the federal government during the last census, which was mucked up at some point during COVID. But we should have gotten 2 more congressional seats, probably at the cost of California. So we are correcting the record. We're doing what we need to do to ensure that our constituents are well represented in the House of Representatives.
Does all of this come at a cost for those that have really suffered from the devastating floods that you've had in Texas and that bill that should have been voted on that now hasn't been because you're all caught up in this redistricting?
Well, the bills just got filed. I mean, we've been doing our work in committee through the special session. We don't have a full-time legislature. We're part-time. We finished our work in May, but we had some outstanding items, and including a storm since the last session. So the governor called a special session partly to do some redistricting and mostly to do some flood relief and some flood bills. And we'd like to get to those too. We also have some property tax reforms and some other things that are not as exciting, but we'd like to get to those. But the Democrats have chosen that their political futures, their political seats are more important than flood relief.
Representative Kyle Tepper, very good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lucy. Cheers.
Let's take you to Japan. Millions of people are remembering the 80th anniversary of when an atomic bomb was dropped on a civilian population for the first time, followed by a second bomb 3 days later. The attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki hastened the end of World War II, but it came at an estimated cost of more than 118,000 lives lost instantly across both cities. Many people, however, died later on from radiation sickness, bringing the final number of those believed to have died to at least 200,000. Our Japan correspondent Shaima Halil has been speaking to survivors in Hiroshima and the students trying to keep their stories alive. A warning, her report does contain upsetting images from the start.
At 8:15 in the morning of August 6th, Japanese time, the first atomic bomb struck an enemy target.
This is the moment the U.S. hit Hiroshima with a weapon so powerful it wiped out whole communities in seconds. Under the atomic bomb's mushroom cloud, men, women and children were burning alive. Nuclear radiation engulfed the city, poisoning those who survived the blast. The horrors of that day are etched in Shingo Naito's memory, and now in these paintings by young pupils. For the past few months, he made regular visits to their school and shared his memories.
My father was badly burned and blinded by the blast. He couldn't even hold my hand. He placed his hands on my shoulders, but I just couldn't walk with all his weight on me. My mom gave us a stick to hold and stay together. My mother also suffered terrible injuries, but she was trying to save my 4-year-old brother and 2-year-old sister from under the collapsed roof.
His younger siblings didn't survive. His father died 4 days later. Naito-san was only 6 at the time. It's a level of suffering that 17-year-old Miyabi and Ichigo found hard to grasp. They've spent weeks painting Naito-san's account of the day, trying to do it justice.
I had to rely a lot on my imagination. I needed to picture the exact color of blood, for example. It was awful and very painful to draw. But I feel very strongly that it is my duty to pass this on to next generations.
The damage caused 80 years ago was horrifying, so I can't even start to imagine what we could experience today. That's why I want to tell the world about what happened.
With the dwindling number of survivors, Naito-san says it's even more crucial now to keep sharing his story. As the bloodshed in Ukraine and Gaza continues, and with the recent bombings by the US and Israel of Iran's nuclear facilities, he fears the world could face another unthinkable disaster.
This worries me so much. What if the radioactive substances were released in those bombings? We must abolish nuclear weapons.
The atomic bomb helped end the Second World War, but it unleashed the terror of nuclear warfare. Today, Hiroshima stands as the city of peace, a testament to its survivors with a message to the world. Never again should any nation or people endure such devastation. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Hiroshima.
And as Shaima was saying, Hiroshima today stands as a city of peace, and we can show you live pictures of the middle of Hiroshima. That building there might be familiar to you. It is right in the middle of Hiroshima. The ruins of this doomed building really stands there as a stark reminder of what the city went through, even though today it's thriving. 1.2 million people live there, but they will all be watching today when the ceremony takes place. A record 120 countries and regions, including for the first time Taiwanese and Palestinian representatives, will take part. And we'll bring you much of that ceremony live here on BBC News. So I hope you can join us for continuing coverage. For the last year, our Paris correspondent Andrew Harding has tracked one of these smuggling gangs responsible for a number of migrant deaths on the French coast. His report comes the day before the government in the UK launches a new scheme to tackle the small boats crisis following a deal between the government and France, where some migrants arriving in the UK by boat will be detained and then returned to France. In return, the UK will accept asylum seekers who have not tried to cross the Channel and can pass security and eligibility checks. Here's Andrew with that report.
We're undercover with the people smugglers in their forest hideout. We've spent the last year tracking one criminal gang, a gang responsible for at least a dozen deaths in the Channel. We filmed them secretly near the French coast. We followed them and their passengers as they play hide and seek with the police. And we followed the money all the way to Birmingham to expose the gang's international network.
Excuse me, sir, we're from BBC News. We know you are linked to a people smuggling gang.
Our investigation began back in April last year. We witnessed this battle on a French beach, police clashing with smugglers. In the chaos,